Hello, one and all, and welcome to the channel. Today, in light of the arrest in the Idaho State case where 4 innocent students lost their lives tragically, allegedly at the hands of one Bryan Kohberger, it has reignited our outrage with the Shaquella Robinson case. And we're going to address a couple of elephants in the room. And in the Robinson case, there are a few. But first, our heartfelt condolences go out to the families of the loved ones of those very young people. It's just unbelievable what occurred in their home. And we want justice served in that case. Right now, we're going to bring our thoughts, though, to the reoccurring questions a lot of people are asking over the last days. And that is, what's going on with the Cabo Six? Why haven't any of them been detained? Right now, we're witnessing law enforcement's resolve and expertise in apprehending Bryan Kohberger as a suspect in the Idaho State murders. Almost out of thin air, they found this guy while going into the investigation with no real leads to speak of as the case began. This is now being called the biggest case in America, and it very well may be in the land of life, liberty, and justice for all. And with that all being said and true, we cannot allow the seeking of justice for Shaquella Robinson to get lost in the sauce. Both of these crimes were inhumane acts of wickedness. In the case of the Idaho State students, it was terrible. They were starting off with basically nothing. This crime was perceived as rather random. And initially, officials were mainly focused on the obvious task of ruling out suspects because by their own accounts, they had so little to go on. That's basically all they could focus on initially. But that's not what happened in the Shaquella Robinson case. The most basic police work just didn't happen. It was a huge failure. I could just call that a crime in and of itself, what went on down there in Mexico. Police let the suspects go without a second thought. And the biggest problem we're currently having as we all await the news of an arrest or some kind of progress with our emotions on edge is going on months now. The biggest problem right now is that there is no evidence or express concern from the authorities in the U.S. for the loss of life, that being Shaquella Robinson of North Carolina. Now look, we're all glad that law enforcement has someone in custody for the Idaho State crimes. As concerned citizens of the world, this is what we all want to see. The guilty party detained for monstrous acts like this. And assuming that we have the guilty individual in custody, the efforts of law enforcement should be applauded. It should be applauded anyway, because they went after this dude. But today, we're going to also put those same heroic efforts in the spotlight because the way in which authorities got right on it with a rather swift call to action in that Idaho State case, we're not seeing the same thing happen with Shanquella. Huge contrast we're witnessing in the handling of the Shaquella Robinson case. A case with so much evidence, it's starting to look like a miscarriage of justice, and we just can't have that. We won't have that. This is all kind of strange because the mountain of evidence, being the video, amongst other things, is the equivalent of a confession because the perpetrator that boldly carried out this savage attack that led to the loss of life of the beloved Shaquella Robinson, this suspect, Dejanay Jackson, boldly committed this act for social media before Halloween. Until now, she spent the holiday season and rang in the new year in total freedom along with her cohorts, okay? And I can tell you right now, this is not acceptable, and we still have other elephants in the room as we continue to demand justice for the Robinson family. Now, how can it be, even though the authorities in Idaho were kind of looking for a needle in a haystack with the suspect, they still found him? Starting off with no idea of who this guy was. And all of us who have been following the Shaquella Robinson case, we find this rather jaw-dropping. We are so outraged by this crime that occurred during a group getaway, and we have been raising our voices about what occurred down there in Mexico with this whole group turning on her. 6 people. Maybe one of them is questionable, but even the most obvious of the suspects, who is clearly guilty and videotaped, she hasn't seen one night in jail. She has not been detained. So we're shaking our heads and asking, why has there been no progress with the Shanquella Robinson case? Well, I'm going to show you one reason right now.
Last night, in conjunction with the Pennsylvania State Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, detectives arrested 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on a warrant for murders of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee. I want to personally thank these agencies for their assistance in this case. Kohberger resides in Pullman, Washington, and is a graduate student at Washington State University. We will provide as much information as we can about the extradition to Idaho and the criminal process. However, due to Idaho state law, we are limited in what information we can release today until Kohberger has his initial appearance in Idaho court. I want to express my appreciation to our local community, the people of Idaho, and those throughout our nation who provided information to help us investigate these murders has been very impressive. We've received over 19,000 tips.
That's heartbreaking. You heard the officers say their names: Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen. And you see the humanity in that officer. The man is struck to the core, just the way we were with Shanquella, or the way anyone should be struck to their core to see such innocence treated like that. Human life. It's just inhumane. And these officers were motivated and outraged that someone would commit such a heinous act against these 4 innocent young people. And aren't we all outraged? I don't want to see this happen to anybody's loved ones, to anybody's child. But with law enforcement, hello law enforcement. Hello, Department of Justice. Hello, FBI. What's going on? What's the holdup? The Cabo 6 made a video for you. They made it easy for you. And still we have no arrests. And I'm really kind of tired of hearing that authorities are just being careful. What? For what? Miss me with that fiction. I'm telling you what careful is. Careful is how they've left that 6-bedroom house that belonged to the Idaho State Students. They left that a crime scene. It remains a crime scene till this day. All cleaning has been put on hold, postponed, don't touch anything. Meanwhile, in the villa where Shanquella's life was cut short, this property and the whole resort environment around it never skipped a beat. They never took a pause for the cause. And neither did the Cabo 6 suspects. They weren't ever even considered suspects. So being careful, it's obvious that an American citizen, a U.S. citizen, was improperly handled. Her passing was swept under the rug. Every entity that oversaw the handling of her body did her wrong. They did her dirty with that non-existent police work. And American officials that have their eyes on this case, they all know it. So miss me with the excuses. It's not hard to prove that all of this carefulness, this is fiction. I'll show you how fictional that notion is. This elephant in the room. Oh, we got a few elephants in the room. But how hard is it really to gather up this Cabo 6, this crowd, and ship them over there, extradite them over to Mexico? It cannot be that hard. Here we have Bryan Kohberger's Extradition. It is just like Nancy Grace said. The woman spoke the truth. I've never seen such a thing, but there it is right there. One sheet of paper. One single sheet of paper. Nothing complicated. I don't see a lot of words on there. Very simple. Now, the Cabo Six, they all come from the North Carolina area. Charlotte, North Carolina. They belong to a community. They're easily recognized. What's the mystery here? What is the mystery? Anyone can easily place them at the scene of the crime at the right time and place that would make them serious suspects. It is not hard to gather this information, and for sure you can seize their phone records. There's no hoops for investigators to jump through to discover who these individuals are and where they live or where they're laying their heads these days. And just get this case wrapped up. Now, that house where the Idaho students were attacked, that was a popular hang, like a go-to spot visited by numerous kids, which added stacks upon stacks of information for the investigators to sift through. But they put the time in. They were dedicated. You know, those were some dedicated individuals. They were ever present, working around the clock, losing sleep, working overtime. It's something that takes over you when you have passion about getting something done. You're looking for results. So applause. But what's going on with Shanquella's investigation? Which is no investigation at all. Everyone involved from the beginning just swept it under the rug. Just kept sweeping stuff under the rug, cleaning up the scene. That was a villa with mixed company, men and women. No one asked questions at all if she was romantically involved with one of the men there, which she wasn't, but they didn't ask. If someone put drugs in her drink, which no one did, but they didn't ask. Textbook questions and simple procedures, they were all skipped over. Mexican authorities didn't drop the ball. They never picked up the ball. They never picked it up. And the U.S. is acting like they're okay with it. All the news coverage I hear about the Idaho State students, the comments are just a matter of a fact. People are outraged at how long the arrest has taken. They complain about it. Of course, we all want justice and we want it swiftly. So what can we say about the case of the Cabo Six against Xana that happened weeks earlier? And we don't have anything. It seems like someone's trying to send a message that there's a serious lack of concern. We don't care. The concern is just not there. The biggest update that I've heard since all this began back in November is that a business card or some kind of note was taped to the doors of one of the homes of the Cabo Six. Probably the direct aggressor, Dejanay Jackson. Great. But really, are we supposed to feel a sense of relief because some officer taped a business card to the door, their calling card on the door? I mean, look, law enforcement didn't leave a note on the door of Bryan Kohberger. No, they didn't give them the option to ring the police at his convenience. I'm so glad recognizable personalities with brilliant legal and political minds like Roland Martin, Nancy Grace, and Judge Joe Brown have added their voices to this call for justice for Shaquella Robinson. But even with that, we have a lot of prominent voices missing in action. They are MIA, voices that we consider highly respected, community leaders. Where are you? Hello. See, something was done in the fight for justice for those Idaho students because authorities were moved on a personal level. They were dedicated to apprehending a suspect, putting out an all points bulletin on his vehicle, identifying that the vehicle left the city and tracking him down, even eventually getting a sample of his DNA, even though his DNA was not in a database because he never committed a crime. They created a very creative way to get a sample. And again, we have the Shaquella Robinson attacker making a video showing the brutality and all other persons in that group that planned the Cabo crime, all living in the same area of North Carolina. This is kind of a domestic situation too, because they all returned to that same area after the crime, and no arrests were made. It doesn't seem like law enforcement wants to lift a finger or spend a dime on this case. And the U.S. knows that Mexico has no interest as well. This is a game. This is one of the elephants in the room. That's why they let them all go. I'm kind of tired of it. I'm really, just look at the contrast. Look at all the resources used for the search efforts in the case of the Idaho students. Keeping the whole thing well oiled and moving forward, keeping the family in the loop, putting the family at ease, asking for help from the community. In law enforcement, staying in touch and being supported by the Idaho community. That's a beautiful thing when law enforcement shows up to protect and serve you. Even ABC News had said they've been there for weeks. Who was hanging out in North Carolina for weeks? In the neighborhood, dropping off coffee. It's a whole community thing. Majority of these officers are connected to the community, I've learned. And maybe that's just the way it has to be. Because now we have the result that people were looking for. They're relieved and thankful. And we're all glad to hear that they have a suspect in custody. But let's keep those same wheels of justice turning. Let's keep that same energy. Don't slow down now. Keep that same energy, FBI. We want action taken in the case of a Winston-Salem State graduate, Shaquella Robinson. A case like Shanquella's is considered rather textbook. In my opinion, it's almost open and shut, especially with Daejhanae Jackson. And the extradition aspect, they're talking about this extradition, but they don't want an extradition. They don't want none of it. They're corrupt, or they would have never let those suspects leave. But they didn't do it to play nice to Malik and Nazir and all of them. They just wanted to sweep it under the rug. So American authorities cannot really be serious about expecting Mexico to get this right. Mexico has no interest. They know that. Mexico is just saving face. It's going to cost time and money, and they don't want to spend either, because consider that extradition, among other things. They have multiple suspects. They are not trying to deal with that. They know they can get this going. Really, are they trying to do something that outrageous, like have this case turn cold? It's not hard to gather these acquaintances. They are well known in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. The community knows them. They're recognizable. They can easily be placed at the time and scene of the crime. There are no real hoops for the investigators to jump through to discover who these individuals are, where they live. They don't need to collect DNA. This is not complicated. It's just going to take some time. The investigation that led to Bryan Kohberger's arrest wasn't even conducted in Idaho, where he committed the crimes. It was largely conducted in Pennsylvania, where the suspect's parents live. So hello. They didn't do this where he lives and works and chills, not in Idaho, where the crimes took place. Oh, but my good people, you still think the police have their hands tied in the Shaquella Robinson case? Really? That they're just doing their job behind the scenes and moving everything along as orderly and quickly as possible? We would hope that, but miss me. With the clock ticking like this on the Shaquella Robinson case, a case that has a mountain of evidence that is pretty straightforward, I'm like, at least you should have the primary suspect in custody. I'm very concerned now. And just listen to this perspective. You will see the contrast in the way things are happening with Shanquella just from listening to this commentary about the Idaho crimes. And I'm going to react to that.
More about this and what this hearing means, we're going to be joined now by Brian Silver, a former prosecutor. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. First and foremost, what can you tell us about what this extradition hearing means and how soon potentially Bryan Kohberger could be back in Idaho?
So the extradition hearing really does not have much to do with the substance of the case. What happens is when a person is located outside of the jurisdiction, here the defendant is in Pennsylvania, there's an Idaho warrant for his arrest. So Pennsylvania took him into custody, but but he needs to be extradited from one jurisdiction to another. As everything in our legal system, a person has the right to challenge, a person has the right to ask questions. So the purpose of the hearing is to give the defendant the opportunity, if he so chose, to challenge extradition. Typically, that's a non-go. Not much is going to happen. It's very infrequent to find a poor extradition.
And how maybe quickly will he be in a courtroom in Idaho if he does plan to waive this extradition?
So this is not a normal case. This is a very high-profile case with a lot of victims and a lot of victims' family. It's a case that has national attention. They're going to transport him quickly. Under normal circumstances, it can take time. They say the jail bus is the slowest bus in town. And unfortunately, when a person has to get transported from one side of the country to the other, it can take a bit of time. But given the high-profile nature of this case, I expect him to be in Idaho rather quickly.
Okay, y'all heard that. That's what I'm saying the whole time. In this case, it's perfectly understandable for things to be sped up or be done in an alternate way because of public pressure. Never heard anyone suggest that even once. Any of these talking heads or pundits, never. We're just supposed to believe that we should be patient and everything's going to happen the way it should. What has happened the way it should in this case? I think Shanquella's body being brought back home to the States because the father just happened to be in contact with some sympathetic person. But everywhere else around Shanquella has been failures until she arrived home with her community. And no one has stopped talking about this. Yet and still, we're supposed to be patient and just wait. Well, you see, the Idaho families are not just being patient and waiting. They are making noise. And keep in mind, he's speaking from the defendant's point of view. He's sympathizing because that's what he is, a defense attorney. So even he is saying that things will probably move more swiftly because of it being a high profile case, which I would consider Shaquella Robinson's case a high profile case. It is a high profile case in so many of our minds and hearts. It definitely will change the way we move going forward. That's for sure.
And I think the big point you brought up was also DNA in the car, two key pieces potentially to what the Idaho police are looking into. From your perspective, how big are those two pieces of evidence, from what you're looking at?
The answer is it's yet to be seen. And something the public does not understand until they become a juror in a criminal case is that not all DNA evidence is created equal, okay? Some DNA evidence is very reliable, and other DNA evidence is terribly unreliable. Sometimes it can pin the exact person. Other times they're not so sure. And that assumes you have a properly collected, properly stored, and properly tested sample. When you have a local police department in a rural area that has very little homicide experience, it's not uncommon for them to trample on these crime scenes and conduct collection of evidence in a manner that is not forensically sound. This evidence, even if it has a clear-cut answer, may end up being challenged for lack of admissibility because it became suspect. They didn't collect it properly. It was maybe, subjected to contamination, for instance.
I mean, that just says a lot to me. I'm just showing pieces of his interview just to show some points about this case. I mean, this town has not seen act in 7 years. It's a quiet town, but they moved with the speed of lightning to the best of their ability. And all this powerful law enforcement came in, this organized, well-trained law enforcement came in with the FBI, as they should, to get a result. I would expect that for any fine Americans, and Shanquella is a fine American. She deserves the same respect. Speaking to the point of collecting evidence, what did Mexico do? They never declared it a crime scene. Yet they want to talk about in these last days and weeks about how they've revisited the crime scene. It was never a crime scene. Housekeeping came in there. You sent everybody home. You didn't collect evidence. You just wrapped it up. This is saying a lot. That's why sometimes you shouldn't just listen to what people are saying directly to you. Watch what they do. Watch how things happen and move along in other situations. A lot of times that's more telling than the situation you're involved in, because no one is using this kind of language. No one is giving these kind of explanations in relation to Shaquella Robinson's case. They're just talking about patience. It reminds me of some other things that have gone on in the history of underserved communities. So I don't want to get too deep into the psychology of this guy. I just wanted to look at this simple truth, the way that Shaquella Robinson's case has been handled and the way this case has been handled. There's some interesting things. I don't want to say interesting as if I'm fascinated. I'm not fascinated by a mind like his, but it's interesting what people get away with in this world and how people fly under the radar when they obviously have a crack in their head. And it's interesting that his sister, Bryan Kohberger, his sister is a therapist. I believe she's some kind of mental health therapist. I will have to look into that so I don't make any mistakes, but I don't just want to come on this channel just popping off nowhere, because I don't do that in life. But seeing this for what it is, Shaquella Robinson is an American. That's it, and that's all. Her life was taken in a heinous, gruesome way, and she has the right to justice, respecting her life out of respect for the family. And we don't want these Cabo Six roaming the streets. We want them to pay for what they did. We want them to take the stand, just like this Bryan Kohberger. We don't want no Ted Bundy wannabe, aspiring Ted Bundy Jr. roaming around here hurting people's kids. Unless you want some other stuff, you don't want to hear about anything like this happening to any human being. You just don't. I wish divine healing for all the families that have been affected by these terrible crimes, visited upon by their loved ones, the communities at large, all the people that have been touched by these events, including myself. It's really something to see the way some people in this world get down. It's just, we cannot tolerate this. We can't tolerate this. We can't normalize this. I'll be back again. There's some things I really want to break down, but I've heard from so many people and I do read the comments. I hear you guys. But before I address something, I want to give it the time that it needs and the respect that it needs. And I really see this for what it is. Just look at this straight for what it is. From the gate, Shanquella's case was just swept under the rug by everybody. And I want to get to that sweeping under the rug, but I will say this: she deserves justice as an American citizen. Her family deserves justice and respect as American citizens, as taxpayers. That's it. And that's all for today. But I will be back. Y'all be good as we continue to demand justice in the great land of America with liberty and justice for all. For Shaquella Robinson and her family, for Ethan Chapin and his family, for Kaylee Gonclves and her family, Xana Kernodle and her family, Madison Mogen and her family. Mercy. Mercy. Y'all be good. I'll see y'all the next time. Peace.